Think of a scenario where we have a business requirement inside our application where when user try to enter his username or email in the login page, we should not accept any username or email which has a word test T-E-S-T inside it. Of course, I can validate this on the UI side also, but I want to validate the backend side so that if some authentication fails due to this reason, I can log it or I can write an exception into a database. In order to achieve this, we can write a custom filter and inject into the Spring Security filter chain flow by using the addFilterBefore method. You can see here, for your representation purpose, I have defined some inbuilt filters like CORS filter, CSRF filter, and basic authentication filter, which are provided by Spring Security framework itself. So in this chain of filters, I want to inject my own custom filter, which is of request validation filter before the basic authentication filter. So whenever we inject our own filter before a certain Spring Security framework filter, the order we will get is just before the number. So for our understanding purpose, I just define CORS as the filter which has order 1, CSRF which has order 2, followed by my filter which is order 3, and at the last we have a filter which is basic authentication filter with an order 4. So in order to achieve this, let's try to go to the backend code and try to implement a filter with the logic that we have discussed. So here I have implemented a filter which I'll explain you now, but don't worry, if you really want to check what I have written inside this filter, you can always download the source code from the summary of this section and explore as per your needs. As you can see, the very first requirement that we have to follow is we have to implement the filter from the package javax.servlet. Inside this, we need to override the method doFilter, and it receives 3 parameters: request, response, and filter chain. Since we want to deal with the HTTP filters, we have to convert that request, whatever we received, into the HTTP servlet request. Once we convert that, here what I'm trying to see is during the initial authentication from the UI, in the interceptor that we have written, we are sending an header with the name authorization and with a base 64 encoding with both email and the password separated by a colon. So this is what is happening from the UI. So similarly on the backend, in order to understand what is the email entered by the user, I retrieve the header with the name authorization, and inside the header, if the header starts with the name basic, which means this is my proper header where I can find my email and password, I can decode it using base 64 encoding and decoding. Once I have the decoded string, I will separate the string using a delimiter that we have used, colon, in the UI, and the very first string that I get from this token is email, and inside the email I'm just checking if I have test inside it. If it is there, then I will generate a response which indicates bad request received to the UI. So this is not a 401, it just indicates I received an invalid email to the UI application. So this we want to execute before actual authentication happens. Due to that reason, we injected this filter just before the basic authentication filter. Now let's try to configure this custom filter inside our application. For the same, you have to come to project security config.java, and here this is the line that I have added to configure a filter. We can add this line anywhere inside this method, but I just added just before our ant matches, and here I am saying you have to add filter before and passing my own custom filter by initializing it, followed by what is the Spring Security filter I want to consider in order to inject my filter just before it. The filter that we want to consider is basic authentication filter from the Spring Security framework itself. So with this configuration, we inject our own custom filter into the Spring Security filter chain. Now let's try to start the application by going to the main class and by debugging as Java application. From the login page, let's try to perform proper login, which is happy@example.com 12345, and I'm clicking sign in. So login successful as we expected. But let's try to check the console of the backend to see whether our filter is really added into the Spring Security filter chain. As you can see here, just before basic authentication filter, our own custom filter, which is request validation before filter, has been added to the filter chain. And since our email is valid, it didn't throw any error. Let's try to log out, and this time I will enter happy@example.com 12345 is the password. We'll keep a breakpoint in our filter for your reference. Clicking sign in, you can see here the breakpoint has been stopped here, and this is the token that we send, username colon and the password on the UI. We decoded it and fetching the only email part, and clearly my email contains test. Now it satisfies the condition that I have written, so it will return a 400 error which indicates bad request to the UI, but it will not call the next filter in the chain because I am returning from this filter itself to the client. And you can see here in the console, my request has been failed with the reason 400 that we return from the backend. So in this way, we can define our own custom filter and add it just before whatever defined filter provided by the Spring Security framework. In the next video, let's try to add a filter after an inbuilt filter provided by Spring Security. Thank you and see you in the next video. Bye.